Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Naomi Brickel. I am the project director of Supported Decision-Making New York, where I'm leading New York State effort to scale up a supported decision-making system across the state. New York State passed a law in 2022, and part of that law did require a statewide system for anybody who wishes to create a supported decision-making agreement through the process that's recognized in our law could do so. And so I have been hired through funding at Hunter to develop that statewide service delivery system. It's a thrilling project, and I look forward to talking about a little bit of it just to more provide context. But really, this will obviously focus more on recognizing that this is a more national audience, or at least regional audience, that really try to make this a more general and not specific to New York State. And we'll be sharing some resources, that will highlight multiple state efforts. I'm also joined by my colleague, Nichole Hastings. Nichole and I worked previously together. In my previous role, I worked for, since 2009, prior to coming here, I worked at Westchester Institute for Human Development, and I ran our community support network, which included a lot of grants and programs to support families navigating disability service systems, similar to like what we're here today, the groups that we're here with today. But also we did a lot of other just integrated community-based program development. Nichole, I was very fortunate, was one of the last hires I got to make before I left WIHD. And I'm so glad I did, because she's had a tremendous impact in really helping coordinate the efforts for self-advocates out of WIHD, as we call it, Westchester Institute for Human Development. She's a fabulous advocate who's been through supported decision-making and will share her experience as we move forward through the presentation. Oh, so let me go over here. So, I want to just get started with, identity, our own, all of our individual identities, and how those identities came to be. And I want you all just to think about one role you play in your life, excluding sister or daughter or son or brother, because those are roles we play in our lives that we had no choices over, right? Our parents had those choices. But for all of the rest of the roles we play in our lives, we really had choices. So I want you to think of one noun, one role, one noun that describes you, one role you play in your life, and think about how you got there. There may have been some external pressures, right? But ultimately, the person you are today is a compilation of choices that you have made about the direction of your life. And ultimately, we all get to write our narrative, right? And so what this topic is really about is ensuring that, in addition to everybody else, that people with disabilities who often don't get those opportunities to write their narrative, an initiative that's really focused around the premise that every human being has a right to write their narrative. So where does supported decision-making come from? Well, it really comes from our common experience of how we all make decisions. I recently bought a car, and I don't know a whole lot about cars. So the first thing I did was I went to Google and plugged in a few of the cars that looked good to me, and read a little bit about them. That was some support I got in my decision making. But I didn't just trust Google, right? I didn't feel comfortable just leaning on solely Google support. So my son has a best friend who happens to be a mechanic who really likes cars, and he also really likes cars. So I talked to Charlie, and I told him these three cars that I had zeroed in on about, and Charlie gave me advice. I then went to the guy who I was going to buy the car from, who was going to help me get it because I wanted to buy a used car, and I took his advice. All of those resources and people that I leaned on, including my mom, who I called when I said, I'm not sure I should be spending this money. And she said, absolutely, you should. You never do anything for yourself. All of these people that I decided to go to provided support to me in my decision. And so just supported decision-making comes from the concept that none of us make decisions in a vacuum. It also comes from this whole idea of disability from a social rather than medical model. Historically, prior to like civil rights and disability rights movements in the late 60s, disability was really seen as a deficit, as some sort of medical insult to the person that needed to be fixed or was really sad, right? Or was a deficit to that person. But after these movements, disability started to be perceived through a different type of lens, as simply another form of diversity, another form of diversity and difference that makes our community and our lived experience as a culture more rich because of the differences that each human brings. But lastly, supported decision-making comes from our human and constitutional rights of every person to make their own decisions and be recognized before the law. So in the United States, we all have a constitutional right to be recognized before the law. Guardianship actually can take that, is pretty much the only way that that right can be taken away. The United Nations, after we've all probably heard or learned about in school in our history, history lessons back in elementary and high school, we all learned a little bit about World War II and when countries came together after World War II, after the horrible atrocities and inhumanity of World War II, where countries came together and the whole world agreed on these universal rights that all people have a right to enjoy simply by the sake of being human. Over the years, since 1948, when the Declaration of Human Rights was signed by every country in the world, over the years, certain particular vulnerable subgroups have drawn the attention of people as of not enjoying those rights, despite what we all agreed on. And so over the years, the United Nations has brought together groups to think about specific groups and how to ensure that they too can have access to their human rights like all other humans. And these are done through these separate conventions and these gatherings and then written conventions that are like treaties that have been added on to the Declaration of Human Rights. There's a convention on women. There's a convention on children. There's currently right now in the works a convention on the rights of the elderly. And in 2006, the United Nations passed the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And one of the big premises of the CRPD, as it's called, CRPD, Convention on Rights of People with Disabilities, one of the big premises of the convention was this right to recognition before the law, that frequently people who are put under guardianship or conservatorship or other names that it's called in different countries and states lose when they go under these rights and lose their rights to make decisions. The CRPD also took it one step further, though. They said not only are these types of models wrong, they strip a person and lead to a civil death in many cases, but so not only do we have to find ways to make them not happen, and countries have to, all the states that participate in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and this particular convention, have to find ways to ensure that people don't lose this human right of legal capacity. They took it one step further in saying that in particular for people with disabilities, states must also ensure that they have the supports in order to enjoy that legal capacity. And that's where supported decision-making as an international movement really came out of. Every country in the world has a supported decision-making movement, pretty much. I actually, I shouldn't say that, but most countries that I'm aware of do. As an example, Mexico's government, not last summer, but actually the summer before last, their Supreme Court, because of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, the Mexican Supreme Court ruled that guardianship, any form of guardianship, is unconstitutional, and require that every state pass regulations and laws to recognize legal capacity for all people and to ensure that the CRPD was being implemented. So really, this is part of a bigger international movement And every state in the United States also has their own project, their own initiative. Many states have laws. Many states have funding for movements to support the use of supported decision-making, and some have both. So supported decision-making, as I mentioned, can take lots of forms. It can be completely informal, like when I was buying the car. But it can also be informal with a written agreement where an individual with a disability sits down with their chosen supporters and lays out, this is the types of supports I want from you. Nothing legal about it, but it's just an arrangement that's made. There's also one that can be more formalized where, and this happens in New York State, but also happens in other states where there's movements that have helped people access support to create their agreements, these agreements with someone. So they have outside resources that facilitate their development of their agreement and their partnership with their chosen supporters about the supports that the individual wants, as well as and who those supporters will provide that support, as well as what are the role of each of those supporters in this written agreement. And lastly, in many states, we have supported decision-making agreements, laws that recognize supported decision-making agreements and require third parties to recognize them as well. In New York, we have a unique combination of the third and fourth bullet. We have a law that recognized a formalized process, and that for any agreements made within that formalized process, third parties would be required to acknowledge those agreements and can't tell a person or their family that they need to get guardianship before, say, a doctor will see them, but also protects the third party from liability when, when there's a concern that on their part that the person might not be able to provide informed consent. So there's also some science and some research that backs this up, both around self-determination, which the research around self-determination goes back to the 90s, and Michael Waymeyer was really a leading researcher and academic that first started writing about self-determination. And since the 90s, continued academic research and has continued to show that self-determination, that people who live some more self-determined lives live more normal lives, live more fulfilled lives, are more likely to live and work in the community. But there's also in the past years been more and more research on supported decision-making. And what the research shows there is that young adults who use supported decision-making are more likely to be independent, make their own decisions, and make better decisions. So I just want to cut through some of the jargon that we use in this model so that I can use the jargon and won't be accused of using jargon. So the first, and it's pretty intuitive, kind of common sense jargon. The individuals who participate in supported decision-making, and this I think is the case in most states and most projects, here in New York, we refer to them as decision makers. Supporters are the people who they choose and who provide supports to them as they're making their decisions. In my formal agreement, that was Google, that was Charlie, it was my mom, and it was my car guy. And then a supported decision-making agreement is that kind of, in many cases and in many states, states that have laws that recognize formal agreements, it's a formal agreement, it's a contract where individuals choose those supporters, and it's all documented in that contractual agreement. So I'm not going to be New York centric. Of course, we New Yorkers, wherever you live in New York, you think 20 minutes north is upstate. So we New Yorkers tend to be very New York centric. And I've been very deliberate not to do that today. But I do think New York has a very enlightening guardianship story that provides, I think, really a real light bulb around how supported decision-making and guardianship work together. So our guardianship law goes back to Willowbrook. Many people, even outside of New York, have heard of Willowbrook and the horrible scandal of Willowbrook, of overcrowded institutions where people were treated subhumanly and abused and held in cages in squalid, horrible conditions. And fortunately, that travesty was brought to light and really led to, especially here in New York, New York was one of the first states to really move to an deinstitutionalization. And here in New York, being slightly ahead in pushing for it, because Willowbrook was right in Staten Island, right in the middle of New York City. As individuals started to be taken out of institutions and put into more community-based support group home environments, family members advocated strongly for protection. How do we protect our kids who've been protected from any decision making, they've been enclosed in four walls, and now they're living in the community? How do we protect them? And that's where guardianship, 17A guardianship in New York, applies only to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And in 1969, that law was passed specifically for people with developmental disabilities. I wanted to share New York's context because 1969, that law was passed, and it has never, ever changed. IDEA, which most parents have heard of because it's the law in the United States that governs special education. IDEA, which opened up schools to individuals with disabilities, further provided access to the community. IDEA was not passed until 1975. So really thinking about this law that goes back to 1969 and never been changed, and was developed within a context of what seemed to be very inclusionary, intent, a very progressive intent at the time. But since 1975, we've had a lot of young people who've been educated alongside their typical peers. We've had people with disabilities who have access to the general education. I have a daughter with autism who's 28, who was in the school play, who was in special education classes, was in general education classes, sung in a nationally ranked choir, traveled to Japan. Those were opportunities with that choir. Those were opportunities that did not exist for individuals with her type of disability in 1969. And a law such as the guardianship law that New York has, it's not that it was wrong, it's just that it's outdated. In November 2024, the New York State Bar actually wrote a report calling for the urgent reform of 17A guardianship, for lack of a better word, to get caught up with the times. And one of the things that they referred to in their report was that existence of a very comprehensive supported decision-making process that exists in New York that could be a very sound alternative to guardianship. So again, I'm not sharing my story, New York story, because I only know about New York, but because I think it's very enlightening in the history of a lot of these guardianship laws. They weren't necessarily inappropriate at the time they were written, but they've simply become outdated in the time that we live in today. So just to drive home this fact, and as I do this, I do want to just put this in the chat. Hold on, how am I going to do this? Oh, where'd y'all go? Oh, come here. Okay. I want to drop this in the chat. Come on. So while I'm sharing, and now let me come back to my center view. While I'm sharing this on the screen, New York, I've also shared in the chat the guardianship laws that exist for all of the states that are included, in this network. But I want to drive home one thing about New York State law. In New York State, we have a separate guardianship law for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. In most states, that's not the case. But under New York law, there are two types, and they differ tremendously in the rights and amount of due process protections they offer to the person with the disability. Article 81 guardianship is for people who without intellectual and developmental disabilities, and Article 17 is only for people with IDD. In Article 81 guardianship, the individual has a right to an attorney. They have the right to a notice to be notified. They have a right to a copy of the petition. They have a right to be present at the hearing. None of those things are true for a person with IDD for whom a petition is being sought for guardianship. So there are many, many people in New York State who are under guardianship who have never been informed, who never had a right to say, I don't want to be. And there's not exactly a lucrative law practice for those people to access to regain their rights, because most of those people have very little funds, because as all of us know, if you're an individual who depends on the adult service system, you utilize your Medicaid access to access that system. And Medicaid requires that we be poor. So there aren't too many people seeking to restore their rights that can go out and find an attorney. So those individuals depend on Disability Rights New York, here in New York, and those protection and advocacy resources in other states. Unfortunately, those are all under the gun now with these federal cuts. So there's very little, especially here in New York. Other states have far more rights, and California actually has a cool law that they just passed that requires notification and requires an attorney be assigned immediately if a person wants to get out of guardianship. But in New York, when you're under 17A guardianship, you really lose all your rights. It's plenary, which means full guardianship, that all decision-making goes from one person to another. So it really is a very dramatic, and I would humbly suggest, somewhat outdated for most of the individuals who might fall under it. I really do believe there's a place for guardianship for the most severely impacted individuals, but for young people like my daughter who sang in a choir, were in a play, and have friends and utilize self-directed services here in New York State, it doesn't really seem appropriate that they wouldn't have a right to make decisions. So some of the unintended consequences of guardianship. The National Core Indicators Brief is the largest survey of people with IDD. It's a national survey. They get a sampling from every state of family members, individuals, and practitioners. And, in addition to identification of guardianship pipelines like special institution and other institutions that direct people, they've really identified that recommend that people go under guardianship. So many family members, that's just what we're told. That's what I was told when my daughter was of transition age. But it also identified some unintended consequences of guardianship, which include really just access to living a normal, fulfilled life. People under guardianship are less likely to have friends. They're less likely to live in the community. They're less likely to work. They're less likely to be married. All of the things that, for many of us, we wouldn't really necessarily even think of ourselves as human without having a right to pursue those institutions in our lives. So just to sum up, when we're talking big ideas about supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship, we're talking about support for a person to make their own decisions as opposed to guardianship, which is substituting decision-making. We're also talking about this big concept, and this is my big light bulb that I've gained in the past 2 years working on this project, is this idea of competence and capacity really for every single human being equals our natural abilities, discrete abilities in those areas, which can vary depending on all different aspects of our lives, plus the support we access. I've talked before, I don't know a lot about cars, so I utilized support of Charlie, who knows a ton about cars. Charlie has needed some transition planning support in his life. He's come to me as somebody who's helped people access employment and directed people and done a lot of career coaching. Charlie felt that, so we're talking about, like, we all in the discrete areas of our lives have different levels of capacity, and people with disabilities are no different. One of the things that a person loses when they lose a right to make decisions is their right to learn from bad decisions. I consider myself a much wiser person in my 50s than I did in my 20s. And I look at my kids with my children with and without disabilities, and I see that they have a lot to learn. And I know as a mom that a lot of what they're going to learn is going to be by tripping on their face. And when we take away rights for people to make decisions, we also take away the right for them to trip on their face and to learn from tripping on their face. And sorry, that sounds a little harsh, but I have 4 boys, and sometimes they just need to trip on their face. And then lastly, this is a big idea for me as a mom, supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship. In New York's process, at least, and I think in many states' process where there's an actual process to create the agreement, that people work with someone to really think through and make a very deliberate, thoughtful agreement. When that's done with thought and intentionality, a true support network can be developed. And in our process, a lot of time is spent on working with the individual. Like before that individual signs the agreement, the facilitator signature that they signed ensures that that individual knows what went into the agreement, that their preferences are represented in the agreement, and that process adds to a certain intentionality in decision making. People who go through our process, we have some great anecdotal stories of individuals who, 1, started to understand that it was their decision, but 2, also started to understand that while it was their decision, that can be scary sometimes, and that the support network around them was a really nice tool and nice resource to have, rather than simply burying their head and being anxious about the decision. And I'm thinking in particular of one individual who articulated that really well, that he said, I used to just bury my head and not want to make decisions. Now I know they're mine to make, but I also know that nobody makes them alone, and I didn't really understand that before. All right, so hopefully So just to sum up, supported decision-making represents support for an individual's autonomy and their own decisions, as well as opposed to substitute decision-making. In states with laws, we're talking about legally enforceable decisions. So where an individual's decisions are protected by the law. We're talking about, remember, in states without a law, or in situations where people don't use the structure for the law. We're talking about formal or informal arrangements. You don't have to have a contract in place to utilize supported decision-making. You could have a conversation. And lastly, we're talking about autonomy and self-determination. So I mentioned earlier that every state has a supported decision-making initiative, and what I pulled together, there's 2 slides. So if you don't see your state on this slide, wait for the next one. But I wanted you to just know that it exists. And why I pulled this together is really just to inform you that there is something there, and that hopefully you can go. It's very easy. I was able to develop this by Googling supported decision-making in each of these states. So in your own state, there's probably something going on, and you can really just Google it and find out what are the resources to learn more in your own state. Oh, sorry, so I think I skipped. So the first slide these are the states that actually have formal supported decision-making laws. So see if you see your state there. And if you do, there's a lot about it online. And then these are states with no formal law, but strong advocacy efforts. So sorry for skipping through those. So I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I really just wanted to drive home the fact through here that New York State's law was really founded on a premise that, and I think every movement, but I think this language in particular in our law is so important, that supported decision-making acknowledges that stigmas about people's abilities and even their lack of ability to make decisions really come from outdated views of disability. That we all everybody uses supports, and in that regard, people are no different. I'm not going to skip over what our law does because I really want to give Nichole time to speak. But I do want to say that our law was passed in 2022. The regulations are going to hit New York State's register next Friday, and within 90 days of it hitting the register, the law will be in full effect. So currently, even though we have a law, we do not have a law that's in effect. Yeah, that will be within 90 days. And yet, in our courts, in New York State, guardianship is done in the surrogate court. And in New York State, we have more and more and more and more surrogate judges who are referring individuals to supported decision-making New York saying, this alternative exists, and this individual has a constitutional right for a less restrictive alternative to be tried before I go ahead and take away their rights. I'm going to skip over that. Again, I just want to show what's possible. Our project, which was done, one of the really key things I think to the success of our project has been that it's been done in partnership with our state developmental disabilities agency and our state legislature. We really did. Judge Glenn, who founded this project, first developed a model that she got from our state council on development. She got from funding. She developed the model with funding through our council on developmental disabilities. She studied models from all over the world and came up with took the best of all and what she thought was missing from all and built a model. She then got the state DD agency to buy into that model. With that collaboration, she was able to convince the legislature to pass our law recognizing our model. And that has led to our New York State Bar saying it now really is time for us to consider changing our guardianship law. And they've used us as an example. Our project's also been recognized nationally. Many have heard of the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and in a recent journal article, they acknowledged our project, again, for this partnership. And for those of you in states that may not have formal laws or may have formal laws, but may not have this DD system involvement, this is what our project was recognized for, the partnership of the legislature, as well as the oversight of the DD system and the funding through our DD system. And lastly, which I'm most proud of, in 2024, our model here in New York was recognized by the United Nations as one of 2 model projects for the entire world, for those same exact things, for this partnership between the legislature, the higher ed CUNY, who developed the model, and our state DD system. And I got to go to Barcelona, Spain, to speak in international human rights to talk about it. So really powerful. Our project has had a lot of impact. So now I want to hand it off to Nichole. Nichole is a powerful advocate. I'll let you. I'm going to let her speak really firsthand about her experience, because Nichole's story with supported decision making, I think, is a really telling one. And I asked her to be here today to talk a little bit about it. But before she does, I do just want you, I have shared this PowerPoint and the link. Nichole and I did a podcast recently, and I just re-listened to it. And Nichole, as she has a limited time today, but she really does a fabulous time. And I encourage you all, a fabulous job talking about the issues. And I encourage you to listen to it. So Nichole, with that, I want to hand it off to you for 10 minutes so that we can then leave a few minutes for questions at the end.
I will try to do this in 10 minutes. I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to be here today. So I'm going to talk to you about my experience about supported decision making. This is actually going to age myself a little bit, but I have lived on my own for 20 years. I have had full guardianship over myself because my parents believed in dignity of risk. They never pursued it because they believed that I deserved the right as an individual with a disability to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And I have made mistakes and, learned from those lessons. But when this concept or this project came about, I was like, Naomi brought it to my attention because she knew some of my background, and I do need support due to my own disability. Like I have difficulty or a hard time understanding medical jargon. I have a lot of anxiety when it comes to working with um, medical providers. And I was in the process of buying a modified wheelchair accessible vehicle, which they are more expensive than a normal car because they have more bells and whistles on them and they're more expensive. And so I went to Naomi when this concept first come about, and I was like, Naomi, why would I do this when I have my rights? Wouldn't I be giving up my rights? Why would I do that? And after talking numerous times with Naomi, going through the information with Naomi, I thought that this would be a option for me because it allowed me to have supports and choose the supporters that I chose to be around me to help me with making those medical, making those, having help to make those medical decisions or those financial decisions. I will let you know because I'm trying to do it fast, kind of quick, that my supporters do not do it for me. They do not make the decisions for me. They inform me of information that I might not understand. They're with me at a doctor's office. So if I don't understand something, I can go back to them and say, okay, explain it to me in terms that I understand because they're using jargon that I don't understand and I need to make a medical decision about this soon. So that's one thing that they do for me. And one thing that I'm going to stress that Naomi loves that I mention about this is this should not be a program. This should not be a new concept. This should just be a normal process for an individual with a disability to go through because who in their right mind wants a label? A person with a disability has enough labels. I don't want to be labeled as using this program to live life because God, God knows I live a full, fulfilled life. I work a regular job. I live in my own home. I live in the community of my choice. I'm a small business owner. Um, I have a full life. And I think one of the things that makes this um project or program so rewarding is I can choose who supports me. It's not people that just come into my life yesterday. It's a friend that I've known since I was 9 years old. It's a family member. It's a DSP that has been with me for over 10 years. They are people that know me well, know me so that when I make a mistake, they know how I've made the mistake. They know where I need the help. They know when to step in. I don't necessarily need to reach out to them and say, there's a problem. I need your help now. They know. They know by my voice tones. They know by by my messages, by the tones, by my eyes. And this process is also able to be used for someone that is nonverbal. Because you know what? Whether we're verbal or nonverbal, we have a way of communication. You just need to get to know us and know the way that we communicate. And, it gives me the chance to know that I have support and supporters that love me, that are around me all the time to help me when there's a decision that I need to make. But at the same time, I don't have to give up my rights. So it's a very meaningful process to go through. And when you work with our facilitation team in New York here, They are very good. My facilitator was very good. There's different areas of supported decision making that you can choose from that you need help in the areas that you need help in. And the facilitators or team that you work with can help you figure that out. That's what they're there for. But at the same time, I went into my facilitator and I said, okay, I need help with medical, financial, and that's it. And she was like, okay, okay, we'll do the process right there and we'll stop it whenever you want to stop. And I have to say real quick, also what's unique about this program is you can change your supporters at any time. So you can start with supporters and they can move on, or they're not the best fit for you. So I have a supporter that is good at banking. So he helps me with banking because that's a choice that I've made where I need assistance. I have a supporter that is a retired nurse practitioner in the medical field. That's also where I need help. So I have chosen my supporters who are natural to me that have the information where I need assistance in the areas that I need assistance. And they recognize my decisions, they accept my decisions. Even if I make a mistake, they're like, okay, we'll just we'll just keep moving and pick up the pieces and go on because it's human nature to make mistakes, and people with disabilities need to be human and need to be able to make those mistakes to be able to learn. And like Naomi said quickly, guardianship, if it's taken away from you completely, is a civil death. And you don't get the choice as a person with a disability to choose who you want to support you, what you want to do, and how you want to be supported.
Nichole, thank you. There's something you said that I think I want to just expand on because I think it's a really important point. Well, you made a lot of important points, but the one thing you talked about was like even people who are nonverbal have preferences. And I do this with Nichole, and I worry sometimes that people might think, okay, well, she's an adult, like a wise adult. She's had a chance to make mistakes and learn from them. She's, has a job, she works, she lives on her own. So that doesn't apply to my kid. My kid's nonverbal, or my kid has much more significant disabilities. And I just want to say that it's all about accommodation. We have people who have been through our facilitation process, which is a very involved process. It lasts 6 to 9 months, but we do have people who have gone through our process who are nonverbal. In order to create a supported decision-making agreement, preferences need to be identified for the decisions for which a person wants support. And if a person has a support network around them who, like I know so many people with kids with very complex, comprehensive disabilities. And yet so many of them, the mom or the dad or the sister will be like, oh no, I know what she meant to say there. And so we've really like worked very, very deliberately on our project to ensure that supported decision making is not just available to people like Nichole, who've got their act together, but also to people who are younger. Like my kids without disabilities in their 20s don't quite have their act together to be really making decisions on their own. And the whole point is this isn't about making decisions on your own. It's about making decisions with support and finding a network around you so that you have people to lean on as you make those decisions. Nichole, anything else you want to say before we open it up for questions? Because you always have these great pearls of wisdom.
And I always say there's a slogan I like, and Naomi loves it. And I live by this slogan: label jars, not people. Because people are people first, whether you have a disability or not. And I would say, even if you're questioning if this is for someone you work with or someone you care for or a loved one, reach out to whatever state you're in, reach out to whatever network, get whatever information you can, and learn. And knowledge is power.
And feel free to reach out to us as you are advocating within your own states to learn what we've done, to learn like Judge Glenn did in founding this project. She reached out to every model project. She talked with Bulgaria. She talked with Israel. She talked with what were the other countries? Australia. She talked with Texas. So this was not built like in a New York centric way, you know? It was built with a very like what's everyone's doing and who's doing it right and how do we make our model the best it can be utilizing what people have already without recreating the wheel. So really open invitation to reach out to us. The reason I put my phone number there is because our project's currently in a state of transition, and I'll likely have different contact information in a month. But call me, text me. My phone number is not going to change, and I'm happy to be a resource for people who are looking to further develop the models in their own state. Now, it's 12:55. Oh, Nichole, I'm sorry. Did you have something you want to say?
Real quick, if you would like to talk to me more about my personal firsthand experience, I'm open. I'm an open book. My email is there as well. You can always reach out to me as well. And I have a monthly group that we run through the Westchester Institute for Human Development, if anyone would like to learn more.
So thank you. So now what I'd like to do is I think I'm going to stop sharing so I could see. And if you have questions, I'd love to hear them. Oh, Jane, I love that comment. The process of using different countries' knowledge sounds like supported decision making. That's a great, I never really thought of that, but exactly. Any questions from anyone?
Naomi, there was a question. Let me find it here. Someone asked, I have a question about state level human rights. Do they address this specific topic?
In New York State, they do because our law was passed because of, it was actually passed as a human rights initiative. We don't have we have our protection and advocacy that's very connected, our Disability Rights New York, but I don't know if I understand the question outside of that context. I think there was another question, but I don't know if the hand went down.
Good afternoon. Can people hear me?
Yes. Hi, Shami.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Shami. I'm with Disability Rights as an advocate in the Virgin Islands. I was asking, because I'm actually from New York, so I'm very familiar. What I was asking is that I know that people are obviously around the country, and Virgin Islands does not have a state level human rights, but I know many, many states do, probably almost all states, but not every state. So my question to everyone else is, does your state level human rights address something that's specific? It's just kind of an inquiry about other states.
I don't know if anyone has insights on that. Any other questions? Well, in that case, I do want to thank everybody for taking the time with a nice large audience, and I hope it was informative. I want to thank Nichole especially for her time. I see.
Anything I can do to spread the word of how this works, not only for me, but others, how it can support is one of my passions. So I thank you guys for the time as well.
I see there's a question, and I don't know that's supported decision making is specific, has a specific answer. But in a case where somebody has experienced bullying and does experience bullying, I think trying to gather a support network of friends and creating an area in, like, here in New York, we have supported decision-making agreements, and we choose areas, and having an area specific for this, because nothing's more isolating than that, right? And I know that because my own daughter was a target of bullying, and so frequently targets of bullying don't share with anyone. So I think almost creating a supported decision-making process around that idea of this is specific for support in this case. We all know that when we're feeling low, it's hard to be empowered. And when we talk to objective friends who realize how bad what's happening to us is, we get a little bit more objective about, you're right, this isn't okay, and I'm not alone. And so I would just say that maybe there's a way, and I'm happy to talk through it more. If you'd like, you could call me, that somebody might create a specific agreement around that very topic.